can I reduce my risk of getting dementia? We're talking about this article again today. A few people have been a bit sceptical in the comments in my past videos, so I thought I would hash some things out, but it is always good to be scrutinising the data, so well done. Firstly, I want to ask you 3 questions. Number 1, if you smoke, are you guaranteed to get cancer? No. Number 2, if you don't smoke, are you guaranteed to not get cancer? No. Number 3, if we completely removed smoking from the entire world, would we expect to see a decrease in the number of cases of cancer? Yes. If you disagreed with my answers there, I'm probably not going to be able to change your mind, so feel free to click away from this now. But this is the concept of risk, and it's a really tricky one to get your head around, and I think that analogy does it quite well. So just bear that in the back of your mind while we're talking through the rest of this video. So the first thing that I want to say is this article, there's a number, a value called a PAF, and I want to explain a little bit about what that is first. So PAF stands for Population Attributable Fraction, and the authors of this paper have calculated for each one of these 14 modifiable risk factors what percentage those account for cases of dementia. So if I completely removed one of these risk factors from the population, by what percentage would I expect to see a decrease in the number of cases of dementia? And when you combine all 14 of those risk factors together, that population attributable fraction pops out at just about 45%. So nearly half of all cases of dementia could potentially be removed by addressing these 14 modifiable risk factors. The next thing I want to say is actually how have they got to these results? And there's a lot of people who've been saying correlation doesn't equal causation, and that is very, very true and a very good thing to be aware of. So this is a meta-analysis. They have studied all of the data from many, many different studies and analysed that. And they have done something called correcting for other factors. So what this means is, and we'll take one of the examples in this paper here. So one thing that we see is obesity as a risk factor for dementia. There are some other things that you might expect to see with obesity. For example, high LDL cholesterol and diabetes. So how can you tell which of these is actually the one that's most likely to be having an effect on someone's risk for developing dementia? Well, you can separate your groups based on, for example, people who are obese who do not have diabetes versus people who are obese who do have diabetes. And this is called controlling for other variables. And what's popped out from this study is that even if you control for these variables, you still see all 3 of those risk factors popping up separately. So meaning cholesterol, regardless of whether you are obese or not obese, is still shown statistically to likely have an effect on someone's risk of developing dementia. There's another example of this, and I want to talk about that as well, hearing loss. So hearing loss has been associated and identified as a risk factor for dementia, and there's a correlation between how severe the hearing loss is and how much risk you have of developing dementia. But what are some other things that you might expect to see in someone who develops hearing loss? Well, potentially they might be a bit more withdrawn from social situations, and this might make them depressed. We also see depression and social isolation as risk factors for dementia, but again, other variables have been controlled for. So we're studying these as specifically as it's possible to study these in this type of analysis. So these numbers aren't perfect, but there is sufficient evidence, in my opinion, to back up the claims that these 14 modifiable risk factors for dementia are real. The next question that I want to address, and actually I was at a talk 2 weeks ago by Jill Livingston, the author of this paper, the lead author of this paper, and the question was about sleep. How on earth is sleep not on this list of risk factors for dementia? And what I want to say is sleep is incredibly important. Good luck functioning without any sleep. But the tricky thing is in studies like this as well, it's very difficult to actually quantify sleep. And Dr. Livingston said something similar to this. Essentially, if you look at the data when it comes to sleep, it's all over the place. Some of them really, really suggest that there's a strong link between dementia and poor sleep hygiene. But the problem comes from a few factors, and one of them is that it's really difficult to quantify sleep. First and foremost, many people aren't aware of how many times they wake up during the night, how disrupted their sleep is. They forget these things, and it's very difficult to quantify and statistically analyse. The next thing is, when we talk about why someone is not sleeping, there could be many, many reasons. Are they very busy and living a very happy, fulfilled life? Or are they chronically unwell and in severe pain and their sleep is incredibly disrupted? Both of these people are not sleeping as much as they should be sleeping, but the causes and probably the effects of that are likely very different. So yes, sleep health is very important, but it hasn't statistically been narrowed down as one of these risk factors, but I imagine that might change at some point in the future. I think that's all I want to say on this topic for now. I hope that this has clarified a few things. Again, like I say, many of these risk factors are not things that one individual person can change. Some of them are, but this is on a global scale. This is what can we, as the world, do to reduce our chances of getting dementia. So things like environmental exposures, pollution, etc. That's not something that you're going to be able to control yourself. Do go and have a look at the image and see what you think, and as always, feel free to scrutinise the data. Please do. That's everything. Thank you. Bye-bye.